It was just another late afternoon, and the sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink as the sun began to dip behind the city skyline. She had just finished a long day at work. Her mind was full of thoughts about the cases she had handled, the meetings she had attended, and the endless paperwork that seemed to pile up no matter how much she completed. She felt a deep sense of relief as she slipped into her car, ready to drive home and leave the stress of the office behind. Traffic was light at first. The hum of the engine and the occasional honk from other drivers created a rhythm that was almost soothing. She turned on some soft music, letting the calm notes fill the space around her. Driving home was usually a quiet, reflective time. She thought about calling her mother to tell her about a small victory in court earlier that day. There was a feeling of satisfaction that she rarely allowed herself to fully enjoy. This was her life, her achievements, but the world outside seemed ready to challenge her at every turn. Suddenly, a flashing red and blue light appeared in her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt a familiar wave of anxiety that always came with the sight of a police car behind her. She pulled over to the side of the road, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted her seatbelt and placed her documents on the dashboard. The officer who approached her car moved with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, his eyes scanning her with a sharp, almost judgmental gaze. "License and registration," he said, his voice firm. There was no warmth in his tone, no small talk to ease the situation. He seemed impatient, as if her presence on the road itself was an inconvenience to him. She reached calmly for her wallet, her movements slow and deliberate, showing no sign of fear. She handed him the documents, keeping her voice steady and polite. "Here you go, officer." He looked at the papers briefly, then back at her, narrowing his eyes. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked. There was a pause, a tense silence in the air. She had learned long ago that questioning the reason could often escalate things, but she also knew she had the right to ask. She kept her voice calm. "No, officer." "Could you please tell me?" The officer hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the road behind her as if checking for witnesses. "You were speeding," he said finally, though she knew she had been driving within the limit. There was something else in his voice, something that suggested this was not just about speed. He leaned slightly closer, and she could smell the faint scent of coffee mixed with something more metallic, the kind of smell that made her skin feel itchy. "I don't think I was," she replied softly, maintaining her composure. "I was watching the speedometer carefully." Her words were polite, but there was a quiet strength in them that made it clear she would not be intimidated. The officer's expression shifted slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was surprise or annoyance. "Step out of the car," he ordered abruptly. Her stomach tightened. She had been pulled over before many times, but something about this stop felt different. There was no explanation, no careful questioning, just a command that carried an unspoken weight. She took a deep breath and opened the door. The air outside was warm, carrying the faint smell of exhaust mixed with blooming flowers from nearby trees. She stepped onto the asphalt, her heels clicking softly against the road. Her hands were visible, resting calmly at her sides. She knew her rights, and she also knew the power of remaining composed in a situation where others might try to provoke her. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her tone steady, professional. There was no fear in her voice, only a controlled calm that seemed to surprise him. The officer glanced around as if looking for support or validation, then back at her. "I need to ask you some questions," he said, his voice tight. "I saw you make some movements that seemed suspicious." She tilted her head slightly, maintaining eye contact. "I don't believe I was doing anything suspicious. Could you please clarify what you mean?" Her voice was calm but firm. She had learned over the years that standing her ground politely but clearly was often the most effective way to prevent unnecessary conflict. The officer's lips pressed together, and he seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "I just need to make sure everything is okay," he said finally, though there was a sharpness in his tone that suggested he doubted her honesty. She nodded slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Of course. I am happy to cooperate. I just ask that the questioning remain relevant to the stop." A few cars slowed down nearby, drivers curious about the scene unfolding. She noticed the occasional glance from pedestrians, some sympathetic, others indifferent. She kept her focus on the officer, not wanting to give him any reason to escalate the situation further. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy as if the space between them was charged with unspoken judgments. He stepped closer, and she could hear the faint crunch of gravel under his shoes. "Do you work around here?" he asked, his tone now a mix of suspicion and curiosity. She smiled politely. "I work downtown," she said. "I am a lawyer for the state. I handle cases in the courthouse." Her words were calm, but inside she felt a spark of frustration. She knew that revealing her professional status might change the way he treated her, but it was also important to assert who she was. The officer blinked, just for a moment, and there was a subtle shift in his posture. It was as if he had been reminded that appearances could be deceiving, that someone he had assumed would be intimidated or compliant was, in fact, someone with authority and knowledge. He cleared his throat, his voice slightly less harsh. "I see," he muttered, glancing at her documents again. She remained calm, letting the silence stretch for a few moments. Inside, her mind was racing. She had encountered prejudice before, but it was always jarring when it happened in plain view, when someone assumed their authority allowed them to judge her without reason. She thought about how many women, how many people of color had faced situations like this without the confidence, the knowledge, or the support to assert their rights. She had to navigate this carefully, not just for herself, but for the principle of fairness and respect. After a tense pause, he handed back her documents. "You may go," he said finally, though his tone lacked sincerity. She nodded, carefully stepping back into her car. The door closed softly behind her, and she took a deep breath, letting the engine hum beneath her as she settled into her seat. She started the car and slowly merged back into traffic, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The drive home felt longer than usual. She replayed the interaction in her mind, analyzing every word, every gesture. She thought about how easy it was for people to assume, to judge, to treat others as less than, based purely on appearance. She felt a quiet anger, but also a sense of resolve. She knew she would report the incident, not out of vengeance, but to ensure accountability. People needed to understand that authority came with responsibility, and that respect should be given, not assumed. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. She sat in the car for a moment, letting herself exhale fully. The moment was brief, a small pocket of reflection before she faced the rest of the evening. She thought about the lessons of patience, composure, and resilience. She knew that encounters like these were not just about individuals, but about the larger systems in which they existed. She had learned to navigate them carefully, always standing her ground while maintaining dignity. As she finally stepped out of the car and walked toward her front door, she felt a mixture of fatigue and determination. The day had been long, but it had also reminded her of her own strength. She had faced bias head-on and had come through without losing herself. The incident would stay with her, certainly, but it would also serve as a quiet testament to the power of calm, clarity, and courage in the face of injustice. The next morning, she woke with the memory of the previous day still heavy on her mind. The sun filtered softly through her curtains, painting the room with warmth, but inside her a storm of thoughts swirled. She could not shake the encounter with the officer. The words, the tone, the assumption, all of it replayed over and over like a loop she could not stop. She had faced difficult situations before, but this felt different. It was not just about her. It was about the subtle ways people assumed authority and judged others based on appearances rather than actions or character. After a quick shower and a cup of coffee, she prepared for the day ahead. Work was waiting, as it always did, with a stack of cases that demanded attention and focus. Yet her mind kept drifting back to the stop. She thought about what might have happened if she had not known her rights, if she had been intimidated or fearful. She shivered slightly at the thought. So many people, she realized, faced similar encounters every day, and not everyone had the knowledge, experience, or confidence to handle them. Driving to work, she noticed the city had its usual morning rhythm. Cars honked impatiently, pedestrians hurried along sidewalks, and the smell of fresh bread and exhaust mingled in the air. She tried to focus on the road, on the music playing softly from the radio, but her thoughts kept circling back to the incident. It was not just a stop. It was a reminder that bias could show up anywhere, even in routine situations. By the time she arrived at the office, she had decided to address the matter formally. She could feel a quiet determination rising within her, a sense that she needed to take action not just for herself, but to set a precedent for fairness. After settling at her desk and organizing the papers for the morning, she drafted a calm, detailed account of what had happened. She wrote down every moment she could remember: the approach of the officer, the questions he asked, the way he looked at her, and her own reactions. Accuracy was crucial. She wanted her report to be clear, professional, and indisputable. When she finished, she sent it to the appropriate department within the police oversight system. It was a small step, but it felt like an important one. She knew that change often started with documentation, with speaking up even when it felt uncomfortable. She had spent years in the legal system advocating for justice for others, and now she found herself turning the same principles inward, standing up for her own dignity and rights. The hours at work passed in a blur of meetings and case preparations. She immersed herself in legal documents, reviewing evidence, and strategizing with colleagues. Yet the memory of the stop lingered, a quiet tension that refused to fade. She could not ignore the uncomfortable truth that people were judged before they were known, and authority could sometimes be misused when unchecked. By mid-afternoon, a message arrived from a colleague, a quiet note of support. "Saw the news about your encounter. Stay strong." She paused, a small smile breaking through the tension she had carried all morning. It was comforting to know that even in a large system, there were people who understood and believed in fairness. It reminded her that she was not alone, that her actions mattered, and that her courage could inspire others to recognize bias and speak against it. Later, she left the office to attend a meeting with community leaders. They were planning an outreach program focused on legal awareness and civil rights. Walking through the bustling streets, she noticed the subtle interactions between people, the nods of respect, the hurried apologies when someone accidentally bumped into another. It struck her that the city was full of small gestures, some kind and some dismissive, reflecting the larger world in miniature. During the meeting, she shared her experience quietly, carefully choosing her words. She spoke about the stop, the assumptions made about her, and the importance of maintaining professionalism in the face of prejudice. Her colleagues listened attentively, nodding as she described the moment when she revealed her position as a state lawyer. She explained how power dynamics shifted instantly, not because she demanded it, but because the truth was undeniable. The discussion turned toward ways to educate the community on rights and responsibilities. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. The incident, while unsettling, could serve as a teaching moment. She thought about workshops, informational sessions, and public discussions that could help ordinary people recognize their rights and handle similar encounters with confidence. It was a way to transform discomfort into action, personal experience into collective empowerment. After the meeting, she returned to her car, the city streets now bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. The memory of the stop returned again, but this time it was accompanied by a sense of resolve rather than frustration. She had the power to act, to influence, to make her voice heard, and she would do so, not with anger but with clarity, professionalism, and unwavering dignity. Driving home, she reflected on the officer's behavior. There was a subtle arrogance in the way he had approached her, a confidence in his assumptions. She thought about the countless individuals who did not have the opportunity to respond with calmness or authority. It was a reminder of the systemic issues that existed beyond individual encounters, of the broader patterns of bias that could influence actions and decisions, yet she refused to let it defeat her spirit. By evening, she had arrived at home, the sky darkening to deep shades of blue and purple. She made herself a simple dinner and sat quietly, allowing herself to unwind. The incident from the day before still lingered in her mind, but she had taken steps to address it formally, turning frustration into action. She reflected on the importance of being aware, prepared, and steadfast in the face of unfair treatment. Later that night, she reviewed the report she had submitted, ensuring that every detail was accurate and complete. She added notes about her interactions, the officer's words, and the subtle cues that had made the encounter unnerving. She wanted to ensure that anyone reviewing the report could understand the full context, not just the surface events. Accuracy, she knew, was a tool for accountability, and documentation was the first step toward meaningful change. She also thought about the emotional impact of the incident. While she had remained calm outwardly, there had been a storm of feelings inside: anger, disbelief, frustration, and a quiet fear. She realized it was important to acknowledge these emotions, not suppress them. Writing them down, reflecting on them, and transforming them into purposeful action was part of her process. She understood that resilience was not about ignoring feelings, but about using them constructively. As the night deepened, she prepared for the next day. She thought about the cases waiting at the courthouse, the meetings with colleagues, and the responsibilities she carried as a state lawyer. Yet she also carried with her the memory of the stop, a reminder of the work still needed in society. The encounter had been brief, but its implications were long-lasting, touching on the everyday realities of bias, assumptions, and the misuse of authority. Before going to bed, she sent a message to a close friend, sharing her thoughts about the incident. She wrote about the frustration, the quiet strength required to navigate it, and the importance of speaking up. Her friend responded with encouragement, reminding her that her actions mattered and that her courage could inspire others. She smiled, feeling a sense of connection and support that made the weight of the experience easier to bear. As she lay down, the events of the day replayed in her mind, not as a source of anxiety but as a point of reflection. She knew that bias existed, that assumptions were often made, and that authority could sometimes be wielded unfairly. But she also knew that she had the tools to navigate these challenges: knowledge, composure, and the ability to act with integrity. The encounter had been uncomfortable, even painful, but it had also strengthened her resolve and clarified her purpose. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried a sense of quiet determination. She dreamed of fairness, of justice, and of a world where people were judged by their actions rather than appearances. She envisioned herself continuing to advocate, to educate, and to inspire, transforming experiences of bias into opportunities for awareness and change. The morning after, she awoke with renewed focus. The memory of the stop was still present, but it was now accompanied by clarity and purpose. She had documented the incident, taken steps to report it, and reflected on the lessons it offered. She was ready to face the day, her responsibilities, and the ongoing challenges with calmness, dignity, and strength. The stop had been brief, but its impact had been profound. It reminded her that every encounter mattered, that authority carried responsibility, and that fairness and respect were not optional. They were essential. She carried these lessons into her work, into her community, and into her daily life, determined to transform a moment of injustice into a catalyst for awareness, accountability, and positive change. The following week started like any other, with the city humming to life as people went about their routines. Yet for her, the previous incident lingered at the back of her mind, a shadow she could not entirely shake. She moved through the motions of her work, but every interaction, every decision seemed sharper, clearer, colored by the memory of that brief stop. It was more than just the encounter with the officer. It was a reminder of the assumptions people carried and the way bias could surface in the smallest moments. Her morning began with a court session. The courthouse was busy, filled with the low murmur of people shuffling through hallways, the occasional clatter of a gavel, and the echo of footsteps against marble floors. She walked confidently, papers in hand, greeting colleagues and staff with polite nods. Yet beneath her calm exterior there was a simmering sense of purpose. She thought about how her experience the previous week had sharpened her awareness, not just of systemic bias, but of the human side of every encounter. During the session, she observed the interactions between lawyers, defendants, and officers. She noted the subtle differences in tone, the shifts in body language, and the way assumptions could subtly influence behavior. Her own experience was fresh in her mind, and she could empathize deeply with those who were judged unfairly or treated as less than. Every word she spoke carried a careful precision, a reminder of the responsibility that came with her role. After court, she returned to her office to continue preparing for another case. Her focus was interrupted by a call from a colleague, someone she trusted deeply. "I heard about the stop last week," the colleague said. "Are you okay?" The simple question carried weight. She smiled faintly, appreciating the concern. "I'm fine," she replied. "It was frustrating, but I've taken steps to document it. I just want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else without consequences." The colleague paused, then added, "You handled it with remarkable calm. Most people wouldn't have stayed so composed." She felt a quiet sense of pride at the words. Composure had been her ally throughout her life, both professionally and personally. It was not always easy to maintain, but she had learned that it was often the difference between escalation and resolution. The call left her with a renewed sense of purpose. She wanted her experience to serve as more than a personal encounter. It had to have meaning beyond herself. Later in the day, she had a scheduled meeting with a community organization focused on civil rights. The group had invited her to share her professional expertise, and today she decided to include her personal experience in the discussion. She wanted to illustrate how bias could surface anywhere, even in moments that seemed ordinary. The group listened attentively as she recounted the story, focusing on the calm and methodical way she handled the situation. As she spoke, she could see the reactions of those around her. Some nodded in understanding, recognizing moments in their own lives that echoed her experience. Others looked thoughtful, absorbing the details and reflecting on the subtle ways prejudice could manifest. She emphasized the importance of knowing one's rights, remaining calm, and taking appropriate action to ensure accountability. The story, though uncomfortable, became a teaching moment, demonstrating resilience, awareness, and dignity. After the meeting, she walked back to her car through the crowded streets. People passed by, busy in their own lives, but she noticed small moments: an elderly man helping a child cross the street, a barista greeting a customer with warmth, a group of teenagers laughing together. These everyday interactions reminded her that while bias existed, kindness and awareness could also flourish. She felt a quiet determination to continue her work, both legally and socially, to promote fairness and understanding. As she drove home, her thoughts drifted to the officer who had stopped her. She considered what might have been going through his mind, the assumptions he had made, and the surprise he seemed to feel when she revealed her profession. There was a complex mixture of feelings: frustration at the initial bias, curiosity about human behavior, and a deep-seated belief that accountability was necessary. Her focus remained on what she could control: her response, her actions, and the message she could convey through her example. When she arrived home, she spent some time reflecting quietly, writing notes in her journal. She detailed the sequence of events, her reactions, and the lessons she had drawn. Writing allowed her to process the experience fully, transforming a moment of tension into an opportunity for understanding. She also considered how she might use her platform as a lawyer to educate others, offering workshops, talks, or informational sessions to help people navigate similar encounters with confidence and knowledge. That evening, she received an unexpected message from someone who had witnessed part of the stop. "I saw what happened," the message read. "I wanted to say I was sorry you had to go through that. Thank you for handling it so calmly." She felt a surge of gratitude. Even in moments of prejudice, acknowledgement and support could make a difference. It reminded her that human connections, however brief, could carry immense weight, validating experiences that were otherwise invisible. Over the next few days, she continued her routine, but the incident remained at the forefront of her mind. Every time she encountered police officers in her professional work or during personal errands, she noted subtle gestures, expressions, and approaches. She recognized patterns in behavior, understanding that bias was rarely overt. It was often hidden in small assumptions, quick judgments, or the unspoken expectations people carried. Her awareness deepened, sharpening her ability to navigate and address these situations effectively. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in her office, she received a call from the Police Oversight Department. They acknowledged her report and informed her that an internal review had been initiated. The officer involved would be interviewed, and the department would assess the situation carefully. Hearing this gave her a sense of relief and vindication. Her efforts to document the event had been worthwhile, ensuring that the encounter would be evaluated with seriousness and care. That evening, she reflected on the entire week. The stop had been brief, but its consequences extended far beyond the initial encounter. It had sparked a deeper awareness in her, strengthened her resolve, and inspired action. She recognized the importance of addressing bias not only through formal channels, but also by sharing her story with others. Her experience had the potential to empower those who might otherwise feel powerless in the face of similar encounters. The following weekend, she attended a community forum on civil rights and policing. There she spoke openly about her experience, emphasizing the importance of composure, knowledge of rights, and accountability. She described the moment she revealed her profession, highlighting how truth and clarity could shift dynamics and challenge assumptions. The audience listened attentively, some taking notes, others nodding in recognition. Her story resonated with many, sparking questions and discussions about fairness, respect, and systemic bias. After the forum, she stayed behind to speak with individuals who sought advice or shared their own experiences. Each conversation reinforced her understanding that bias was widespread, subtle, and often normalized. Yet she also realized that empowerment was possible through knowledge, preparation, and confident action. Her professional expertise, combined with her personal experience, allowed her to guide others effectively, providing both reassurance and practical strategies for handling difficult situations. Returning home that night, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The incident with the officer had been uncomfortable and frustrating, but it had also opened doors for meaningful dialogue, reflection, and action. She understood that bias could not always be eliminated, but awareness, accountability, and courage could challenge it in powerful ways. She resolved to continue documenting, educating, and advocating, using her own experiences as tools for change. As she prepared for bed, she thought about the subtle transformations the encounter had brought about. She was more aware of human behavior, more vigilant in her professional work, and more committed to promoting fairness in her community. The stop, brief as it had become a turning point, a moment that highlighted the intersection of personal dignity, professional authority, and societal bias. She knew that such moments, when handled with calmness and clarity, could ripple outward, influencing perceptions and actions in ways both visible and unseen. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried a sense of purpose. She dreamed of a world where assumptions were replaced with understanding, where authority was balanced with accountability, and where respect was universal. She envisioned herself continuing to advocate, educate, and empower, transforming personal experiences of bias into opportunities for awareness and growth. The next morning, she woke with renewed focus. She reviewed her notes, prepared for upcoming cases, and reflected on the conversation she had participated in. Her experience with the officer had changed her, not in a way that made her fearful or resentful, but in a way that sharpened her clarity, deepened her empathy, and strengthened her resolve. She was ready to face the challenges of the day, carrying with her the lessons of patience, dignity, and resilience that had emerged from a single, brief encounter on the roadside. As she left for the courthouse, she walked with confidence, aware of the power of presence, clarity, and composure. Every step was a reminder that even small actions, documenting an incident, sharing a story, standing firm in one's rights, could have profound impacts. The city moved around her, busy and indifferent in its own rhythm. But she navigated it with purpose, guided by both experience and principle. The stop with the officer had been a turning point in more ways than one. It had reminded her of the ever-present nature of bias, the importance of professional authority, and the power of truth. It had shown her that dignity, calmness, and awareness could change dynamics, challenge assumptions, and inspire others. And most importantly, it had reinforced her commitment to using her position and voice to make a difference in her community and beyond. The morning started like any other, with her routine coffee and a few moments of quiet reflection before stepping out into the city. But today felt different. The memory of the traffic stop from weeks before lingered more sharply in her mind. She had reported the incident, spoken to colleagues, and shared her experience with the community. Yet the thought of that encounter still sent a small ripple of tension through her. She knew that the moment when assumptions were made about her had been brief, but its implications were far-reaching. She drove to work, noticing the usual hum of the city. Opal hurried along sidewalks. Cars honked, and the scent of freshly baked bread mixed with exhaust in the air. She tried to focus on the day ahead, on the cases she had to prepare for and the meetings she had scheduled. But a quiet anticipation lingered. She knew that the report she had filed with the oversight department might lead to some form of response, and if it did, she wanted to be prepared. Arriving at the courthouse, she moved through the halls with her usual confidence. Colleagues greeted her, some nodding with quiet encouragement, others busy with their own work. She could feel the weight of her experience as a subtle undercurrent throughout the day, shaping the way she approached conversations and interactions. It was a reminder that every detail mattered, every moment held significance, and every action could ripple outward in unexpected ways. Her morning session began with a case involving a minor dispute between neighbors, but her mind occasionally drifted back to the stop. She thought about the officer's demeanor, the assumptions he had made, and the subtle ways bias could manifest even when people were unaware of it. She had spent her life navigating systems, both legal and social, and this incident had become a vivid example of the challenges that persisted in everyday life. After the session, she returned to her office for a scheduled meeting with the oversight department. She had received a notice that the officer would be interviewed as part of the review process. Walking into the conference room, she felt a mixture of anticipation and calm determination. The room was quiet, the air still, and she could sense the weight of formal procedure in every detail. The neatly arranged chairs, the crisp folders on the table, the faint hum of the overhead lights. The officers conducting the review greeted her politely and invited her to sit. She complied, maintaining her usual composed demeanor. "We want to hear your account again," one of the reviewers said, flipping open a folder of her original report. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I have already documented the incident," she replied, her voice steady. "But I'm happy to provide additional details if needed." She recounted the stop clearly and calmly. She described the approach of the officer, his questions, the assumptions he made, and her own responses. She spoke of her awareness of her rights, the composure she maintained, and the way she revealed her professional status. Every word was deliberate, reflecting her intention to ensure accuracy and clarity. The reviewers listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. After she finished, there was a brief pause. One of the officers asked, "Do you think the officer understood who you were when you mentioned your profession?" She considered the question carefully. "I believe there was a moment of surprise," she said. "It was clear in his demeanor that he had not expected someone in my position to be present in that context. But beyond that, I cannot speculate on his internal thoughts." The reviewers nodded. "We will be speaking with the officer soon," another said. "Your account is important and it will help guide the review process." She thanked them, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. Taking formal steps to address bias was not easy, but it was necessary. Every detail, every word mattered. She understood that accountability often depended on careful documentation and measured action. Later that day, she returned to her office and continued working on her cases. Yet the encounter with the officer kept resurfacing in her mind. She reflected on the subtle ways power dynamics could shift when truth was revealed, when assumptions were challenged, and when clarity replaced speculation. She thought about the countless individuals who might not have had the same knowledge or confidence, and she felt a renewed determination to share her experience as a teaching moment. By late afternoon, she received a call from the oversight department. They informed her that the officer had been interviewed and that his behavior would be formally reviewed. They asked if she would be available to provide additional commentary if needed. She agreed, understanding the importance of following through. The process was slow, measured, but necessary. It was a reminder that justice was not always immediate, but diligence could ensure accountability. That evening, she drove home slowly, taking in the familiar sights of the city. The streets were filled with people returning from work, children playing on sidewalks and shopkeepers closing for the day. She noticed the small acts of kindness and care around her, the way a passerby helped an elderly man carry groceries, the polite nods exchanged between neighbors, the laughter of children playing in the fading sunlight. These moments reminded her that while bias existed, there were also countless examples of humanity, consideration, and respect. Arriving home, she reflected on the incident in a quiet, personal way. She thought about the tension she had felt, the assumptions made about her, and the moment of revelation when she disclosed her profession. That moment had shifted the balance subtly but profoundly. It had reminded her that truth, clarity, and professionalism could challenge prejudice in meaningful ways. Yet she also recognized that such moments were rare, and that systemic bias required ongoing vigilance and action. Later that night, she reviewed her notes once more, preparing for any follow-up interactions with the oversight department. She wrote down observations, clarified details, and reflected on the lessons she had drawn. Writing had always been a method of processing, of transforming experience into understanding. Tonight, it served as both a tool for preparation and a form of personal reflection. The next morning, she received an unexpected message from a community member who had learned about the incident. "Your story has inspired many," the message read. "People are talking about fairness and accountability because of what you shared." She paused, absorbing the words. It was a reminder that personal experiences, when shared thoughtfully, could have a ripple effect. One encounter could spark reflection, discussion, and even action far beyond its immediate context. During the day, she continued her legal work, handling cases, reviewing documents, and meeting with colleagues. Yet beneath the normal rhythm of work, a quiet awareness persisted. Every interaction, every decision carried weight. The memory of the stop was no longer just about discomfort or bias. It had become a lens through which she viewed human behavior, authority, and responsibility. It was a reminder of how crucial awareness, composure, and truth were in navigating both professional and personal challenges. By the afternoon, she received another update from the Oversight Department. They informed her that preliminary findings suggested the officer's actions had been influenced by bias, and that further steps would be taken to address the matter. She felt a quiet sense of relief. It was not about retribution. It was about accountability, fairness, and the principle that authority should never be misused. She understood that change required careful attention, persistent documentation, and the courage to stand firm even in uncomfortable situations. Driving home that evening, she reflected on the week's events. The encounter with the officer, the reporting process, and the follow-up interactions had all reinforced a series of important truths: that bias existed, that awareness could empower, and that truth and clarity could shift assumptions in meaningful ways. She also thought about the broader implications, the countless people who might face similar encounters without the knowledge, confidence, or support to respond effectively. Her experience was personal, but it was also part of a larger narrative about fairness, accountability, and human dignity. At home, she spent some time reviewing her professional responsibilities, preparing for upcoming cases and meetings. Yet the stop remained present in her thoughts. She considered the officer's perspective not to excuse it, but to understand it. People often acted based on assumptions, sometimes unconsciously, and recognition was the first step toward correction. Her role, she realized, was not only to advocate for clients but also to model professionalism, fairness, and calmness in the face of bias. That night, she wrote another entry in her journal. Reflecting on the unfolding process, she documented the steps she had taken, the responses she had received, and the feelings that had accompanied each moment. Writing was more than personal reflection. It was a method of processing, clarifying, and preparing for the next steps. It allowed her to turn a moment of confrontation into a source of insight and growth. As the week progressed, she noticed subtle changes. People she interacted with professionally expressed quiet support, acknowledging her composure and diligence. Community members reached out, sharing their own experiences and seeking advice. Even colleagues seemed more attuned to issues of bias and respect in everyday encounters. She realized that a single event, when handled thoughtfully, could influence perspectives and actions in ways that extended far beyond the original moment. By the weekend, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The incident with the officer had been brief, but its lessons were profound. She had confronted bias with composure, asserted her rights calmly, and used the experience to educate and empower others. The revelation of her professional role had shifted the dynamics of TD. He encounter, but the ongoing reflection, documentation, and sharing of her story were what gave the experience enduring significance. Sitting quietly at home, she considered the journey from that first moment on the roadside to the present. Each step, the stop, the reporting, the community discussions, and the review process had reinforced a set of principles she held deeply: awareness, dignity, accountability, and action. The officer's assumptions had revealed a systemic issue, but her response had demonstrated that clarity, professionalism, and truth could challenge even deeply ingrained biases. As the night deepened, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The stop had been uncomfortable, even unjust, but it had also become an opportunity to document, to educate, to reflect, and to influence. She had transformed a moment of tension into one of empowerment, not only for herself but potentially for others who might face similar situations. She understood that the true impact of an event was not measured solely by the immediate outcome, but by the awareness and change it inspired. Lying in bed, she reviewed the week in her mind. The incident was no longer just a source of frustration. It had become a catalyst for reflection, discussion, and personal growth. She understood that bias was a persistent reality, but so too was the power of knowledge, composure, and accountability. She had faced the situation with dignity, revealed the truth calmly, and ensured that her voice would be part of a formal process to address misconduct. As sleep finally came, she carried a sense of quiet resolve. The stop had been brief, but its implications were far-reaching. It had shown her the importance of standing firm in one's rights, the value of clear communication, and the power of truth. More than that, it had demonstrated that a single calm and thoughtful response could ripple outward, influencing systems, perspectives, and conversations in meaningful ways. The days following the officer's review were filled with a quiet tension. She continued with her work as usual, handling cases, attending meetings, and reviewing legal documents, but in the background, a sense of anticipation lingered. She knew that the review process could take time, and she had no control over the pace or outcome, yet she remained composed. Years of experience had taught her that patience and clarity were as important as action. Her mornings began early with a cup of coffee in hand, reviewing notes from the previous day. Each detail mattered. She wanted to ensure that every account she had shared was accurate, every observation documented, and every action she had taken could stand as proof of her professionalism and composure. She understood that the encounter had wider implications, not just for her but for others who might face similar situations in the future. One afternoon, she received a call from the oversight department. The voice on the other end was calm but direct. "We have completed our initial review," the officer said. "Your account was thorough and clear. The findings indicate that the officer's actions were influenced by bias. He will undergo additional training, and the matter will be formally noted in his record." She listened carefully, her heart steady, but her mind alert. This was the acknowledgement she had hoped for. The recognition that her experience was valid and that the officer's behavior would not be ignored. A quiet sense of relief washed over her, but it was tempered by reflection. She knew that the changes were procedural, small in some ways, yet symbolic in others. They represented accountability and recognition, and for her that mattered deeply. The process had reinforced her belief in the importance of standing firm, documenting events, and ensuring that fairness was pursued through proper channels. It was a reminder that even brief encounters could carry weight if handled thoughtfully and with integrity. Over the next few weeks, she noticed subtle shifts in her professional and community interactions. Colleagues spoke to her with increased respect, acknowledging not just her legal expertise but her composure in navigating difficult situations. Community members reached out to learn from her experience, seeking advice on how to handle encounters with authority while maintaining dignity. Her story had become a teaching moment, illustrating the power of knowledge, calmness, and action in the face of bias. She began holding small sessions at her office and in local community centers, sharing her experience and discussing strategies for asserting rights respectfully and effectively. She emphasized the importance of documentation, calm communication, and clarity. People listened intently, asking questions and offering their own reflections. She realized that her story had broader resonance. It was no longer just about a single encounter, but about empowering others to navigate a world where assumptions and bias often existed beneath the surface. At home, she continued to reflect quietly in her journal each evening. Writing helped her process not only the events but the emotions tied to them: frustration, disbelief, and eventually quiet satisfaction. She noted the lessons she had learned about authority, fairness, and self-assurance. Each entry reinforced her belief that dignity and composure were tools not just for professional life, but for personal growth and resilience. One evening, she received an unexpected message from someone who had witnessed the original stop. "Thank you for handling yourself with such grace," the message read. "It inspired me to speak up in situations where I might have stayed silent before." She paused, feeling a warmth that went beyond professional satisfaction. Her actions had influenced someone else, showing that courage and calmness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she had not anticipated. The weeks turned into months, and the formal consequences for the officer were carried out. He attended bias training, and his record reflected the incident and the lessons learned. While she did not relish seeing someone reprimanded, she understood that accountability was essential for progress. It was a reminder that fairness was not optional, and that systems could at times be corrected when individuals took thoughtful and measured action. Her personal life also shifted in subtle ways. She found herself more aware of small interactions on the street, in stores, and in professional settings. She noticed gestures of respect, moments of empathy, and the ways in which people responded when assumptions were challenged. She also observed moments of unconscious bias, realizing that awareness alone could shape better responses. The city, which had once felt like a place of random encounters, now appeared as a network of human behavior, some flawed, some admirable, all worth understanding. She continued her legal work with renewed clarity and focus. Every case, every client, every courtroom interaction carried a heightened awareness of the importance of fairness and accountability. The stop had reminded her that bias could surface anywhere, and that vigilance and professionalism were tools for navigating it. She also felt a deeper empathy for clients who had faced discrimination or unjust treatment, understanding their experiences in a more nuanced and personal way. In community discussions, she spoke candidly about her experience. She emphasized that the goal was never retaliation, but education and accountability. She described how remaining calm and composed, asserting rights clearly, and documenting incidents could influence outcomes positively. People responded with questions, personal stories, and expressions of gratitude. She realized that one person's experience, when shared thoughtfully, could empower many, creating a network of awareness and understanding. She also reflected on the broader societal implications. Bias and assumptions were not isolated incidents. They were part of a larger system. Yet her story demonstrated that individuals could affect change even in small ways by standing firm, speaking truth, and modeling professionalism. It was a reminder that progress often began with awareness and action, and that courage was sometimes quiet but powerful. Even during routine errands or casual outings, she noticed small moments that echoed her experience. A clerk offering an extra smile, a passerby stepping aside politely, or a driver showing patience on the road, all became reminders that awareness and respect were contagious. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, not arrogant, but grounded in the knowledge that dignity and clarity could influence others' behavior in subtle but meaningful ways. One evening, she met with a group of young professionals interested in law and civil rights. She shared her experience in detail, explaining the initial tension, the assumptions, and the eventual revelation of her professional role. She emphasized the importance of knowledge, preparation, and composure in navigating situations where bias could surface. The group listened attentively, some taking notes, others nodding with understanding. Her story had become a living lesson, illustrating both challenges and strategies for effective response. As the months passed, she continued her work, her advocacy, and her reflection. The memory of the stop remained, but it was no longer a source of frustration. Instead, it was a touchstone for awareness, resilience, and empowerment. She recognized that moments of bias could never be entirely eliminated, but they could be addressed, mitigated, and transformed into opportunities for growth and education. She also found a sense of personal closure. The officer's training, the acknowledgement of bias, and the documentation of the incident provided a tangible resolution. But beyond the procedural outcomes, she knew